Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, MMCF 2030, a vision for building resilience and accelerating regeneration. Today's presentation will be recorded and sent out to all registered participants and also be posted on the Hub. We will have a Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. You can type your questions into the question box on the webinar doc. Any unanswered questions will be answered afterward via email. Now on to Anna Warrington, Director of Forum for the Future. Anna?
Thank you, Rose. Thank you so much for looking after our technology. So, welcome everyone. Thank you everyone for joining us. I'm sure we'll get a few more as we come in, but we'll make a start so that we respect everybody's time. Thank you for joining us today on the 5th of July 2020 in this strange period of disruption. We'd love to hear who has joined us, so please do just put in the chat function your name, the organization from which you're coming from, and one word that describes your relationship to man-made cellulosic fibers. That will help us understand who's joined us today and help all of us to have a conversation going forward over the next hour. So, introducing yourselves, we should do the same. This webinar is co-hosted today. It's hosted jointly by Textile Exchange and Forum for the Future. Forum for the Future is an international not-for-profit based in Singapore, India, UK, and the US. For over 23 years, we've been working in partnership with organizations, public and private, civil society and others, to accelerate systems change we need towards a more sustainable future. We've been working in partnership with Textile Exchange, facilitating the industry visioning process that you're about to hear more on. Today, you'll hear from me, the Director of the India operations here in Mumbai. I'll be your host or chief cajoler, I guess, keeping us on to time. And you'll also hear from my colleague Sally Uren, who's our chief executive. Our co-conveners today are Textile Exchange. It's a global nonprofit who I'm sure you're familiar with. They have a focus on fashion and fiber industry transformation. They're a powerful convener, and many of you will know them already or maybe already be part of their networks. If you're not, please do explore their website for how you can benefit from their many knowledge resources and roundtables. Today we're joined by Liesl Truster, the Director of European and Materials Strategy, as well as Simone Cecil, who is the face of the MMCF stream at Textile Exchange. And we'll be gathering today your questions for our panelists later. We're also joined by Purna Pandey, who will be taking notes so we can follow up on anything we don't have time for or can't answer today. And you've already met Rose Johnson, who is our tech guru for today. So if you do have any challenges whatsoever, do pop those in the chat. But as she says, make sure you're recording the questions that you want to ask in the actual Q&A button. Thank you. So welcome, and thank you for sharing who you are. I can see a real wide range of locations coming in. Welcome. So why are we all here? This webinar is the culmination of a year of work by the man-made cellulosic fiber industry and their stakeholders to set a common sense of ambition out to 20 are developed from plant cellulose after processing it into a pulp and then extruding it back into rayon or viscose is the one that's most commonly manufactured or one of the most commonly known manufactured cellulose fibers, but lesser known ones include cupro, modal, and lyocell. So you may well have heard all of those names. Some of you will be experts, others are here to learn. So just giving you a bit of background. As you know, they have a real wide range of uses, and it's getting wider, but they're gaining increasing prominence, particularly in textiles, as well as beauty and personal care products such as wipes and sanitary napkins, particularly over this time in the pandemic. I should raise that we've had a few questions since we've launched this vision as to why we're not calling it human-made cellulosic fibers, and that's a question for the industry, I guess. Today we're here really to share an overview of the vision that has been created across the industry. We want to explore and lift the lid on some of the challenges and opportunities with the industry and the stakeholders here today, and to hopefully inspire and empower you with the information you need to take action on this important area. We want to share some of the insights that we've had over the last year and also kind of build forward into action, because a vision is only as good as the action that is taken towards it. I will try my hardest to keep us to this time flow. We're about to hear from Liesl on why the visioning was done, and then we'll hear from Sally on the vision itself. We're then lucky to be joined by several industry stakeholders today to share their reflections. We're joined by Boris Sara from Earthworm Foundation, Kraylin Andrew from SAPI, and Sharon Chongchoi from Sateri. You'll have the opportunity to pose your questions once they have had a brief discussion. Please do write your questions in that Q&A field that Rose mentioned. You'll see at the bottom of the screen as they occur to you. We'll finish with how you can use the vision and what will happen next, as well as a poll to get your important input. So don't go anywhere. We need your inputs at the end. Thank you again for joining us today. Please do note that when you are writing your questions, we will mention your name when we do pose your questions to the panelists, and this webinar is being recorded for future use, so just bear that in mind as you're writing your questions. So thank you again for joining us today, and with no further ado, I will hand over to Liesl. Go for it, Liesl.
Thanks, Anna, and hello, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Anna. As Anna mentioned, we're a non-profit working to accelerate the sustainability in the textile industry, but with a particular focus on fibers and materials right back at the base of the supply chain. And from this angle on sustainability, we encourage companies to take what we call a portfolio approach to their materials sourcing. So that means to look across their entire supply chain, from cotton to synthetics, man-made cellulosics and animal fibers, and work towards the more sustainable options within each fiber category. And we call this a preferred materials portfolio approach. And this approach is a journey. And of course, every journey needs a North Star. And for us, that's a vision of a world of regenerative and circular materials. So why focus a vision on man-made cellulosics? Well, I think we can all agree that man-made cellulosics, and excuse the man-made, I know we're considering the tone of that, but let's just call them man-made for now. But of course, they're more commonly known as viscose, modal, lyocell, acetate, and so on. And they offer a really beautiful and versatile contribution to the range of fabrics that we clothe ourselves in today. We love the drape, we love the feel, we love the comfort and durability, the ease of maintenance. So there's a lot of things to really love about man-made cellulosics. And while man-made cellulosics make up a relatively small percentage of the entire fiber base, which we estimated last year to be around 6.4%, the potential for growth is really quite high. And as is their potential to create a positive sustainability impact, especially as we look for new and alternative ways to decouple from fossil fuel synthetic feedstocks, which we know we have to do. And of course, there are other industries working with wood-based feedstocks as well as ours, such as the non-wovens and paper and packaging industries. So we can work within this wider community as well. And overall, we want to see man-made cellulosics succeed from both a materials as well as a sustainability perspective. And I also think the opportunity for greater collaboration is really exciting right now, both, as I said, within our sector, but also beyond it. And of course, we're not there yet. There's much we need to do. We were already heading into 2020 being the super year, if you like, for climate and biodiversity, with conventions planned by the United Nations and business cranking up and so on. And then of course, COVID-19 not only halted these very important meetings from happening, but pretty much shut us all down, or at least slowed us all down. Some say this pause offered some breathing space for nature, and for us to have a good hard look at how we're living our lives. The global pandemic's also shown us how interconnected our well-being is with a healthy and well-functioning planet. And more lightly, but just as interconnectedly, has been this call for social justice and equality. And if you think about it, this call for action, if you will, from Mother Nature, from minority communities, from young people, makes it a pretty compelling time to step up right now in every possible way. So along with Forum for the Future, and of course you on this call, we think the time is right for the industry to fully come together for ecosystems and for people, not least those involved in man-made cellulosics production, and for us as the community to show leadership on a just transformation for the industry. So our future will be more than one of ESG, environmental and social and governance, but one of ESJ, environmental and social justice. And on that note, I'm going to hand you over to Sally Uren to tell us how this can happen. Thank you, and over to you, Sally.
Great to be here today. So just before we have a conversation with our great panelists today, I wanted to take a moment or two to explain how we built the vision and what the vision actually comprises of. So if we just have the next slide, please, Anna. And I'll start with how was the vision built? And I have to say this has been one of the most participatory processes we've run at Forum in partnership with Textile Exchange, in that we have tried really hard to bring in the voice of the industry, from producers to suppliers to brands to civil society organizations. All of those individuals that are interested in the future of man-made cellulosics have been involved in generating this vision. Ahead of 2 vision building workshops, one in person at the TE conference last October in Vancouver, and then a couple online in March this year with a predominantly Chinese audience, we have really supplemented that vision creation with many, many interviews and lots of research with many of you on the call today. And subsequent to creating the vision, which we created in outline form in Vancouver, we then took it into the conversations in China. We've then held subsequent sessions with many representatives in the industry to test and refine the vision. And so what we are sharing with you today is very much the output of a vibrant and rich conversation with the industry. And it's great that we're now at this point in time where we can share the vision and have a conversation about how do we bring it to life, because as Liesl says, now is the moment to really unlock the full potential of man-made cellulosics. So if we could have the next slide, please, Anna. This slide gives you an overview of the vision, and the top line is to build for a net positive man-made cellulosics industry. So a man-made cellulosics industry that puts more back into the environment, more back into society than it takes out. And we believe that the delivery of this vision will build resilience and accelerate regeneration in not just this particular area, but broader systems. We have focused on 5 action areas. Some will be more familiar than others. And in a moment, I'll just give you the highlights of each of those areas. And effectively, what we are saying is if we can focus on delivering the ambition within these action areas and also focus on the enablers, which is at the bottom of the graphic here, then we stand a chance of really bringing together lots of interesting and exciting work that's been happening in this industry and really start to catalyze significant change. So what I'll just do is take you through the highlights of each of these 5 areas, if I may. So if we move on to regenerating ecosystems as the first area, 4 elements to this. Much of this will be familiar because the whole conversation around the impact on forests in terms of man-made cellulosics is one that's been happening for a while. And I think it is really important to call out the protection of primary forest here. So at the heart of this particular ambition is to conserve the remaining areas of primary forest, conserve these areas of high carbon stocks, and to reduce the feedstock from high carbon stocks areas. So protection of forests is a really important theme within this area, as is natural system restoration. What I think is really interesting in this area is calling out that ambition to deliver a carbon negative value chain. So really understand how can we manage the land that is delivering the man-made cellulose in a way that drives maximum carbon sequestration. And the fourth element here that I think is really important is this notion of a landscape approach, recognizing that forests are often part of communities, these systems are all interlinked, and that if we can look at a landscape in its entirety, we can understand where are those points of intervention that will drive restoration and protection. So that's the first area. If we move on to the second area, please, Anna. Producing with zero harm. Again, a theme within the industry that is possibly more familiar than others. And this area really just calls out the ambition to ensure zero emissions production, zero hazardous discharge of chemicals, and, excuse me, the withdrawal of fresh water, sorry, excuse me. We also call out the ambition to move to a closed loop production system, which links to the third action area, which, if we can move on please, Anna, which is around circularity. So the third area that is underpinning the vision is enabling circular systems. And this is where there's such an opportunity in this industry to move to a fully circular system. So to understand how can we deliver circular business models, so models that allow value creation in a way that we have inputs being used as, have outputs used as inputs in the processes, and a real focus in this area of the vision to develop the next generation feedstocks, which is a huge contribution that this sector can make to sustainability. But also within this area, there is the ambition that recognises that we need the right policy framework, the right regulations, the right incentives to really scale up circularity ambition within man-made cellulosics. If we then move on to the fourth area, this is an area that has historically received less attention in man-made cellulosics. If we wouldn't mind moving on, thank you, Anna. And talks about the fact that there is a really strong social dimension to the production of man-made cellulosics. And historically, we focus a lot on the environmental impact, but obviously we need to pay equal and due attention to the social impacts. So this fourth area of the vision talks to the need to create prosperity, to look at how might we distribute economic value equitably, and to look at where are there opportunities for the living wage in this industry, and to pick up on a number of issues that hitherto haven't received probably enough attention, which then links to the fifth and final area of the vision, which also has a very strong social dimension to it. And this is the whole need to uphold rights, and picks up the conversation around a just transition, but also picks up those community rights. So free, prior and informed consent are issues that we know we need to pay attention to. And historically, perhaps we haven't paid enough attention to them as we've thought about this industry. So how then can we create a man-made cellulose industry that allows community empowerment and protects individual, indigenous and community rights? And so in sum, they're the 5 areas that we think if we can focus on as an industry, then we can deliver this net positive ambition. Underpinning those 5 areas are a number of enablers, which are just as critical in terms of the ability to deliver this vision. Some of this will feel more familiar than others, and I guess the ones I wanted to pick out were the fact that really a key enabler to delivering this vision is sharing best practice and accelerating innovation. So much activity, so much innovation in this industry, but perhaps not as joined up as it could be. Then I think as critical, and perhaps one of the areas that we really need to focus on, is flows of finance and affordability of solutions. We know that if the industry is going to transition in the way that it could do to really make a positive contribution to sustainable development, we need different financial mechanisms. And that's why, for me, the industry really needs to come together and deliver this vision, because some of the challenges that we face in terms of scaling up next-gen solutions, moving to 100% circularity, protecting communities, these are challenges that one organisation acting alone will really struggle to deal with, and which is why we need the industry to come together and create that advocacy voice. So if we look at that ninth enabler there, a positive voice and advocacy, the industry coming together and really being clear to governments around the world, particularly in the production regions, what are those policies that are needed to allow the industry to transform. So there you have it, a whistle-top tour through the elements of the vision. So we have strong environmental ambitions, strong social ambitions, but really clear that we need to focus on these enablers as well. And so what we're sharing with you today is, in essence, a blueprint for how man-made cellulosics might put more back into the environment and society than they take out, and a number of enablers which the industry at large we think needs to focus on. So I shall pause there and hand back to Anna.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Liesl. And just to say, yes, we will be sharing the slides and the links to the actual documents after the session, including a recording actually of this. So thank you. I'd now like to welcome and introduce you to three people who are going to join our discussion. I'm just going to stop sharing the slides so that we can actually have this more as a conversation. Hopefully you'll be able to see who you're speaking to. Today I'm going to introduce you to Boris, who's the Director of Operations at Earthworm Foundation, to Kraylin, who's the General Manager for Sustainability at SAPI, and to Sharon, the Vice President for Sustainability at Sattery International. So I'm very, very grateful that you can join us here today. Thank you for agreeing to share your reflections. A quick reminder to anyone to put their questions that occur to you as they occur to you into the Q&A function at the bottom here. That means Simone can shepherd them to us because once we've had a brief discussion on some of the key themes that Sally and Liesl have just shared. Do be ready to input on that poll at the end of the session. Just again, one reminder again that we will be mentioning your name and that the session is being shared, it is being recorded. So without further ado, I'd like to start with a general reflection, guys. We've heard from the participants in a survey beforehand that they feel progress is most advanced in the regenerating ecosystems and the zero harm production part of these vision action areas, but that there is also a greatest need and opportunity for collective action in the same, actually, in terms of the regenerating ecosystems, but also in enabling circularity. I wondered what your personal feelings were about where there is most opportunity to take this forward as a vision, and where you're seeing great progress. And I guess just as context, if you could share 2 lines on your organization before you do so that people can understand where your questions are coming from. So I guess, Boris, could I come to you as the sole male diversity in the panel?
So thanks, Anna. Yeah, Boris Sarabert, and thanks for the introduction. Good to be here today. So I'm a forester by background, an Australian forester with Earthworm Foundation for the last 13 years. We work globally, and really what we do is try to work, I guess, between challenges on the ground and companies want to go to implement their sustainability commitments. So yeah, to your question, indeed, I think when you look at regenerative agriculture in general and the whole space of tackling these issues, I really feel that we've got to do more in the collaborative space. We've got to see ourselves as a spoke in the wheel. There are many challenges facing us, and we've got to think how we can fundamentally drive change on the ground. So I really think that's absolutely fundamental to the direction forward. So somehow to not lose sight of what we can actually do and how we can get things moving.
Thanks, Boris. Very pragmatic. Kraylin, I wondered whether you would share your reflections on where you think we're making progress and where you think the biggest opportunities are from your perspective.
Thanks, Anna, and thank you for having me on this call. Yeah, when we created this vision, what really resonated with me was the fact that we were connecting people, planet, and prosperity. And in order to achieve a winning state for all means that we all need to work together. It's about creating shared value to thrive. And specifically speaking for SAPI, I think that's one of the areas where we've been really successful. Creating shared value is ingrained in SAPI's corporate DNA. You know, we are a South African-based company with roots in South Africa. We're a global multinational, but South Africa is a country that is faced by high levels of poverty, high levels of, you know, unemployment and economic inequities. And in order for corporates and for society to actually thrive in this here, creating shared value is the only option for all to thrive. And I think that we've been very successful in creating initiatives on the ground that actually serves to do that, to create shared value. And I'm particularly excited about this vision that we've created for the MMCF sector, and the opportunity to create that shared value within our value chain.
Thank you. That sort of speaks to the creating prosperity closely. Thank you. Sharon, your opening.
Thank you, Anna. So I'm from Satri, which is a viscose producer in China with 1.4 million tons of production capacity per annum. So that makes us the largest producer in China. We also have a lyocell plant, as well as a yarn mill in China. So as a predominantly viscose producer, naturally I would say that producing zero harm resonates most with me. And I've seen some good progress on that front by the industry as with the development of the CDHC MMCF emissions guidelines, as well as the setup of the collaboration of sustainable development of viscose CV in short. But where I think, if I look back at all these 5 pillars, I think where I think collective action is most needed, it would be regenerating ecosystems and enabling circularity systems. I mean, you take, for example, the protection of primary forests. There currently exist, you know, universally recognized standards and best practices out there, which were developed through multi-stakeholder processes, as well as platforms for dialogues, which I think the apparel industry can leverage. I think collaborating with the more mature and experienced experts like the likes of Earthworm and Boris, who understand and have worked on the ground, whether they are forests in Canada, in Indonesia or Brazil, would help come up with solutions that are inclusive and help accelerate the outcome. I mean, I have spent the last 10 years in the agriculture industry prior to joining the textile industry. So I know that regenerating ecosystems is particularly complex and requires deep science to understand the unintended consequences. The landscape of a temperate forest is different from that of a tropical forest. I may not be a forestry expert, but I appreciate the complexities and the technicalities behind it. And this also links and impacts the rights of the communities, which is one of your other pillars of the vision. And there are no quick fixes. So I think this is where collective action is most needed, and of course circularity as well. But I'm mindful of time, so yeah, we can speak more about that later. Yeah.
Absolutely, no. I mean, it's key. I think, yeah, absolutely. The alternative feedstuffs and the circularity is core, I think, to the discussions that are happening here. I wonder whether we could stay with the your last comment that you made about the need for deep science and for a kind of good understanding of the unintended consequences of taking action on to ensure that we are keeping on a trajectory of 1.5, definitely below 2 degrees for climate change. You're absolutely right. I think throughout this vision process, we have heard the complexities that come with the different locations that you might be managing, the different kind of characteristics, and also the interconnections between the regenerative ecosystems, but also the kind of more societal creation of prosperity and the upholding of rights. I think they're very interconnected. I just wondered whether we could touch on the fact that, you know, staying with that, and the fact that climate change is essentially humanity's greatest crisis. We're in the middle of an urgent one right now, but we can't take our eye off the climate change ball. I think it will mean that the pandemic really does pale in comparison. The vision highlights the importance of managing high carbon stock areas so that we can be on that 1.5 degree trajectory. And you've raised that complexity, Sharon. Like, there are huge challenges in doing that. Looking at the enablers of the vision, what do you feel is required to meet this element? I guess, Sharon, I wondered whether you had a first thought on this.
Okay, I think I will have to draw back more on my agriculture experience, because we are predominantly a viscose producer, but we also have pulp producers where we also try to understand their landscape and the complexities. I think it is important that whatever vision and framework we come up with has to be inclusive, because when we talk about very complex landscape like Indonesia, we're just not looking at just the environmental imperatives, but you also have to look at the social imperatives as well, because a lot of people also depend, whether it's the forestry industry or the agriculture industry, rely on that for livelihood. So I think not right now there are a lot of talks about, okay, we have to, if this area is a high-risk area, we should move away from that area. I think that is just a simple and convenient way of us walking away from the problem, rather than trying to understand the challenges and trying to make sure that they are part of our solutions as well. So I think this is something that I'm glad, and thanks of course to Textile Exchange and Forum for the Future, that we are now able to come up with a holistic vision that also considers all the social imperatives. Because when we talk about the likes of carbon stock, high carbon stock, it's not just about carbon. It is not just about the forest, about a thriving biodiversity of flora and fauna. We also have to consider the local communities, the indigenous people. They are very much part of the ecosystem as well. But I think the best person to actually talk about this is Boris, because because they have been in the forestry environments, and they've worked across geographies from Indonesia to Brazil to, I think, anywhere on earth you can just check with them. And get more insights.
Thank you, Sharon. But that was helpful. Thank you. And I think it's important to recognize the different roles of the different players along different parts of the value chain. And I think that's something that deeply came out during the visioning process. But I would like to get Kraylene and Boris's perspective on this particular very high profile and very important issue. So Boris, I think you've been invited in to give your reflections on this.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Anna. You're very kind, Sharon. I think in the end, it really stems, you can use science to understand what is the nature of forest, and use science to sort of determine how best do I go about it. If there is an area that I could develop, is it forest that I shouldn't develop, or is it areas that I can develop? But in the end, you have to look at it through the lens much more of people, production, and natural. You can use science to a point, but you've got to come to pragmatism in the end. You have to think about value propositions here. You can, from the top down, stipulate any requirement, but driving change always comes down to people. And you have to understand the context, and you have to nuance that within the context of where your fiber comes from. So if we're talking about MMCF, in the end, you've got to think through, well, where is the manufacturing facility? Where are the fibers that go to that manufacturing facility? You could identify that some of the fibers are higher risk, and you could take a strategy that says, look, I want to de-link from risk. But the problem is there is still a growing market for no questions asked. And if you de-link responsible demand from those types of regions, you certainly guarantee that they're going to be facing more challenges with less investments and finances to support the changes needed. So I think the heart of everything we're doing is really trying to build solutions bottom up and connect them with the top-down demand that is clearly growing. And then in the context of countries which don't yet perhaps understand the reasons to change, how to help them see the benefits. Like if you're talking about forest fibers? Well, it's not a case of a locked up concession where you can guarantee fiber supply for the next 100 years. It always comes down to communities. What I look at, and I think, from the textile point of view, whether it's cotton, whether it's different agricultural productions, wool production, in the end, we're still talking about people, farmers, and the interaction between production and communities. So again, you have to find ways to seek value, and we have to show those farmers in the end, or those producers or those companies, what's the alternatives. At the moment, there is a fast changing sentiment from the brand side. We have to match that with far more pragmatism on the ground. And HCS came out of that need as well, right? How to create a science-based approach that a practitioner in a company could use to start going forward with responsible development. So I would just, maybe just to conclude there, I think we need to have a strong vision, which is critical, but we must focus on actions that can help people take the steps forward, and we have to have value propositions to get them to do it. Otherwise, why go through all that effort? It's not easy,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that really neatly leads us on to Colin, about your concept of shared value fits within that, I think, from what I understand. I wonder whether you could share your perspective on that through your experience in South Africa and elsewhere.
Yeah, so just thinking about this high carbon stock landscape, this is not a topic that is particularly relevant for, I guess, SAPI and our wood baskets for dissolving pulp. But, when you start to talk about, obviously we have other sort of issues and challenges that we need to deal with, but specifically within the South African space, we've got, and talking about our forestry and communities, we have a very successful community farming project that really sort of gives you an idea of how creating shared value can achieve winning outcomes for all. The project is called, or the program is called SAPI Kulisa, and it involves 4,000 farmers working on 26,000 hectares of land. What SAPI does in this space is that we provide support to the farmers in terms of seedlings, in terms of support of how to grow these trees sustainably. And we have training centers all around the country, SAPI Kulisa training centers, to ensure that the farmers do have the skills and the know-how to grow trees sustainably. Through this program, we've brought in 3.8 million tons of timber into our operations in South Africa, and to the value of 2.1 billion rand, which is like 119 million US dollars. And it's also one of the largest rural female empowerment programs in the country, for which SAPI has won a few awards. And through this program, you can see that we've created a thriving planet, thriving communities, and I think economic gains which have been equitably distributed. And it's one of these great stories that shows how creating shared value can achieve a winning outcome for all, and especially our communities. And it's a particularly relevant issue, as I said, based in being in South Africa.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that through our discussions throughout the visioning process, I think the challenge that everyone has really got in the forefront of their mind is that this is very context specific, and you've worked really hard to understand the need and the context in South Africa. You can't just pick that up and put it in, say, Indonesia, but you can learn from it, and that's why we want to provide the platform to make sure that these conversations are happening, but not assuming a kind of one size fits all across all the different contexts. I think acknowledging the complexities.
Yeah,
thank you.
So I think, and that's actually it, it's context specific. And, if we're talking about carbon stocks, for example, in South Africa, our plantations were planted in the 1950s into grasslands. So we've built up the carbon stock in South Africa. And the question, I guess, around that space is, why not plant more plantations, continue to build up the carbon stocks here? But we're sitting in a water scarce region, and because of environmental reasons, we can't actually do that. We can't grow the plantations. So again, it's country specific. And we have to take all of those considerations all of those factors into consideration as we develop plans to connect people, planet, and prosperity.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, we're talking mostly about wood-based fiber here, but I think that's the case for a lot of the alternatives that are coming in as well. And it's important to recognize that, you know, things like bamboo, hemp, they're all coming through as potential sources of cellulose fiber for MMCF. But it's, you know, all of those complexities, and I think the deep history within the forestry industry can be learned from for any future alternatives that come through as well, let alone the complexities of the circular economy. I guess before we have the chance to hear from some of the our listeners, and please do pop any questions that you have into the Q&A function, which you see at the bottom of your screen. I'm sure you guys have got questions for our panelists, so please do write them in as you think of them. I guess I just wanted to point ourselves, so we've discussed the importance of regenerative ecosystems, the role of kind of interconnections of creating prosperity and upholding rights, and the interconnections across all of the action areas. But I guess Sally highlighted the fact that, you know, without the enablers, the kind of the actions that you can take on these areas, we're not going to get anywhere. And it was interesting to hear from the listeners in the survey that we did before this call, that they highlighted that they feel that the cross-value chain collaboration and the full transparency and traceability, the two kind of most important enablers in their view. And I thought that was really, you know, really interesting to hear from in terms of what they're looking for. I guess we've also, through the conversations, that policy, the context of policy, and the financing are two equally as important enablers. And I was just wondering whether we could share a little bit more on why this may be, and explore that. And I'm particularly interested in how this differs geographically, again, as countries kind of have, I think, Boris, you mentioned this earlier on, they have varying states of policy frameworks, of governance, of enforcement, and therefore the role of financing and policy, I'm guessing, varies greatly across this, and how it can enable this vision to happen. Sharon, I wondered whether I could come to you, because I know that the policy area has been something you've been thinking about.
Yeah, I think policy is not just policy, it's also about financing, right? So for example, circularity is not exactly a new concept or buzzword. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation was formed in 2010 to initiate the circularity discussion. But a decade has passed and little progress is made, right? While the environmental crisis still continues to threaten. I think large-scale action and impact is still lacking, largely due to, as mentioned earlier, the lack of policies that support the development of, say, effective material recovery system, as well as financing, whether it's for the setup of a recovery and recycling infrastructure or the scaling up of innovation from pilot to commercial production. As part of the RGE group, Satri has committed $200 million on circularity and closed-loop manufacturing. We see this investment as a necessity, even despite this backdrop of the pandemic right now, because we are a private company with long-term orientation. But for this large-scale systemic change to take place, more needs to come on board. And we do see that circularity and this vision, we see that this vision initiative actually presents the biggest opportunity for pre-competitive collaboration to accelerate solutions. And on the policy front, I mean, maybe I can speak more from the perspective of Asia, since this is where I come from. I think in Europe or elsewhere right now, people are talking about more policies are needed to support circularity. But I think where we are in Asia, there is still this lack of awareness that we need to address, even before we go on to the stage of policy advocacy and development. But I guess in the interest of time, because the clock is ticking, so I think in Asia, both have to be done concurrently, increasing awareness as well as policy advocacy.
Thank you. I'm glad that you brought up the point on urgency. I think that's very true, given where we are right now. I wondered whether either Boris or Kailin, whether you'd like to come in on the enablers front before we just move to some questions from others.
Yep, maybe just a quick one on the, I guess the way we've always looked at things. I mean, we've always used this BTTV model at Earthworm, which is really getting your values right, making sure you've got clear transparency, transforming the issues based on the challenges you've identified, and then verifying your progress. So when I look at the enablers and the 10 enablers you've got, I think I agree, you know, that it's very key that there is good level of commitments for sure. The next step for me is really understanding your supply. You know, where does it come from? And once you understand where it comes from, you'll realize that yes, there's a difference in supply if you've got a European-based supply or a North American-based supply versus a supply out of Latin America perhaps or Asia. But the fact that you have that supply chain, it's then important to say, okay, what can we do about it? And there are a lot of collaborations growing. So the landscape initiatives now, like we at Earthworm are driving a series of landscape initiatives, and the whole premise is not to drive change from a given commodity. It's to put back on the table an area that we believe is critical to conserve, looking at the myriad of different uses from that particular landscape, making sure people are at the very heart of the model all the time, and then finding solutions using that leverage and combining, whether if you're in Asia, you're talking about palm oil, rubber, you're talking about coffee and different agricultural productions as well as forest fibers. And you're finding ways to foster change. And then the finance flows are really critical, because if you know you're part of a broader approach that's trying to foster change, you're also working with the local governments to say, you know, how does this serve the government's agenda? In the end, if it's coming top down from the West to, say, an Asian, aren't necessarily going to fly either. So you have to find the solutions that work within the context. So I'll just come to that. I think you're right that those enablers you flagged for me are also fundamental, which is the transparency, collaborative actions which don't see MMCF in isolation, and value, which means money flows to solutions, right? And those solutions can be many different things. There's no one fix here. And I think the last thing I would say, although that there is urgency to this, we have to think long term. And that's why the 2030 vision is a really good logic. You know, by working together, we can go further, and we should be talking more about the problems. We should be talking more about things that are flying and where success lands.
Thank you, Boris. Kailin, I think you had.
Yeah, so Anna, you know, when you think about the space of climate change, it's no doubt we need to act big, we need to act fast. And you can't get away from the fact that flows of finance, technology, innovation, partnerships are needed to get to that end state in this short space of time, 10 years to go. You know, and SAPI has just signed onto the science-based, made a commitment to science-based targets. And, you know, this is for our global operations. We're not only the largest dissolving pulp manufacturer, we also have other, you know, manufacturing capability, paper and packaging across the globe in Europe, North America, and South Africa. And so we've had to go through a process for the entire global operations to set the science-based target. And in going to this, you know, we've identified that there are technological gaps, there are financial gaps, and we're not going to get to that zero state in 10 years, and something needs to be radically done. You know, within SAPI, we've now formed a global innovation cluster, specifically looking at low carbon technologies to fill that decarbonization gap for us. And we're actively looking for opportunities for partnerships in that space. You know, we've joined pre-competitive and funded pre-competitive research into low carbon technologies for cooking. This is done through our European operations. You know, this was done 2 years ago, but again, you know, it's looking at how could we take that leap in innovation to get us to that zero state by 2050. And more closer to home, if you look at forestry research, our scientists on the ground have realized that the climate models that have been developed for South Africa are not really adequate for our tree breeding strategies. And so we have now funded research or funded the development of a climate model that's more granular, that will inform our tree breeding adaptation strategies, you know, to disease and pests, to climate changes, to make us more resilient for the future. You know, so when we start to think about the space of climate change, and it is the most defining part of, you know, defining issue of our lives and of our time, I feel that this is one area where we really do need to collaborate more strongly. How do we create this low carbon value chain? Where are those climate hotspots? Where are the greatest dependencies? And this is obviously going to be achieved through enablers like traceability, and that sort of thing. But I think it's also a real opportunity for us within this value chain to create shared value, to produce a value chain that has the lowest carbon footprint, I guess.
Thank you all. Simone, so thank you everyone for the conversations that we've just had. I will summarize at the end, but Simone, I think we have a question.
Yeah, we have a question come in towards Sharon mainly, and it is about the how-to. So Sharon, from what you mentioned, what would be the right way to go about creating awareness about sustainability and circularity, for example, in Asian countries, and have this compete against the price point market that it is?
I think when I talk about awareness, I'm more referring to first consumer awareness, because I think in terms of labeling, they do not know what their clothes are made of, or where they come from, what is the composition of the clothes, what is the end of life, like, what happens to my clothes if I decide to throw it away or give it. So I think there's this lack of awareness that prevents people from appreciating the issue of accept. So this is where I'm more coming from. I think when there is more awareness on the consumer side, I think that will also helps to accelerate, in terms of them being more cautious of disposing of their garments. So this is where I'm more coming from.
And maybe to add to this, there is another question, because you mentioned also end of life and consumer awareness. Another question from Rashmi is, do you think MMCFs will also help to solve problems related to microfiber pollution, and how to support improving, I guess, improvising marine life?
So I think that is more of a plastic issue, a polyester issue when it comes to microfiber. And is that a question, I don't know, more for Textile Exchange? I didn't get the question correct. He was asked, what was it asking? Whether it's a issue for MMCF, is that?
Yeah, if MMCFs can help solve the problems related to microfiber pollution.
Okay, yeah, sure. So that is why we talk about trying to, and I think that's also part of education as well to the consumers, that they can turn to renewable fiber, rather than, with all due respect to the polyester industry, but they can turn to the likes of cotton, the more natural fibers, as well as MMCF like viscose, which is actually, or Textile, lyocell, or this model, which is actually wood-based fiber. I think because there is biodegradability and renewability, so that helps to reduce the microfiber issues in the ocean.
Raylene and Boris, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, maybe just a quick one on the price points. The way I look at things is the price point model today, if you look at the Asian reality too, it's probably last year's or yesterday's model, let's say. I mean, if I think about it myself as a consumer of textile products, well, the future is I want to buy a textile that I know is having a positive contribution to a landscape. It doesn't have to tick the box in any one product. You can set up a future where you're heavily linked to fostering change in regions that desperately need support, and you're contributing to positive things. So I think when that increasingly happens, there's going to be more value propositions for those very interventions. So I think it's a bit chicken and egg in a way, but I foresee, if I had a crystal ball, that there's going to be a lot more demand and a lot more value for truly responsible textiles, which don't look at any one fiber, but put it together in a more holistic sort of lens. So I think that's personally the view that I have and where I think things are going. And I think smallholders and smaller communities, ultimately they're going to be the drivers of positive or challenging interventions. So we have to find a way to put them at the heart of it.
I think if I may add, right? I mean, it really depends on, Boris talked about value proposition and then how it actually speaks to the consumers who care about, you know, all these values. But I guess it also depends on which context, which country, what demographics you're looking at. We have also, my company has actually done a survey on the Chinese consumers in China. You know, they are less on the environmental aspect or the sustainability or aspects of what the garment is made of or made from, but they are more actually focused on, okay, you know, is there chemicals? Is it harmful? Is it toxic? You know, does it bring harm to my body? They are more concerned about these aspects of sustainability, the safety aspect of sustainability, rather than the environmental aspects, whether they are deforestation elsewhere, you know, in outside of China, or whether it is violating the rights of the local communities. So it really depends on the different consumers that we speak to.
Makes sense. I'm a bit aware of time.
Yeah, Anna, back to you. I mean, there's one more question, but we can also, of course, follow up on that.
Yeah, we can follow up that afterwards if that's okay. Thank you for all of your questions. I would just like to highlight a piece of work that is happening by Flora and Fauna International on microfibers. It's worth just looking at what they're doing, because there is an acknowledgement that natural fibers also do contribute to the problem, and how that might occur through the different stages of the value chain, not just at the end washing stage. So yeah, for the person that wrote in about that, I think it's an initiative worth looking for. I've heard, I guess, throughout this, thank you so much everyone for sharing your insights. I heard two particular principles that have come out at me. One is that we need to act urgently, but we also need to have a view for the long term. And then the next one is that realistically, driving change comes down to the people in their context. So I think we all need to act moving forwards with those two principles in mind. And I think it was really great to hear, you know, important points raised, like the need for shared value, the need for deep science and understanding of unintended consequences when taking forward this vision, the importance of a true value proposition across the value chain, including for people as we create that just transition, the need to raise awareness, but concurrently, because of that urgency in terms of policy advocacy at the same time, the development of solutions for the right context, and the invitation to partner more, and the recognition that this is something that no one organization can lead alone. So I think, you know, thank you, Kraylene, for creating some very open invitations to join your innovation efforts, and I'm sure there are more. So I would love to see us going forward and inviting more collaboration on each of these different areas of the vision. And with that in mind, I guess we've created this vision to help people throughout the existing and future MMCF value chain to align their strategies, the operations and the sourcing practices towards the level of ambition the planet and society so urgently need. Please do take a look at the vision document itself. And use it to cross-check your own strategies and your policies. Sign up to the Textile Exchange Hub, where you can find a multitude of helpful materials. You'll be able to see, I'm just going to share a link to you now. You'll be able to see a link here, and we'll share these slides afterwards. You'll find a multitude of helpful materials, as well as a community to share and to benefit from questions, advice and learning on that hub. If you're not already involved in the initiatives leading the way in the areas of the vision, some of which have been highlighted today, like the work of ZDHC and the work of Canopy, please do explore those and understand how they can support your ambitions. This is absolutely about putting all of our weight across all of the different areas of action that are needed. More collectively, in terms of next steps, Textiles Exchange's MMCF Roundtable and Hub will act as the space to review progress, set objectives, learn together and move towards the vision. The detailed implementation mechanism, however, of the vision will be completely dependent on how the value chain actors dedicate resources to work. It is really up to the industry to decide how this vision can be taken forward. We're looking for partners who want to drive this ambition, experts in the areas of the vision, as well as organizations who share the desire to accelerate progress and are willing to collaborate and or provide resource towards that. We recognize that this is a hard time across the value chains involved in MMCF in particular, but are also acutely aware of how this pandemic has raised the urgency for a more sustainable relationship with nature and a desperate need to increase social resilience through addressing inequalities that we've talked about today with our panelists. We think the time is now for taking action on this vision. We're just going to ask you a quick question with regards to this now. So Rose, it will help us understand where the energy lies and therefore where we are best placed to focus our support. I'd love you to, in front of you, you will see a poll question, just one question. We'd love to hear from you the extent to which you might want to get involved in delivering or acting on this particular vision. So I'm just going to give you a few seconds to just respond to this poll in front of you. Okay. As it's one question, I'm sure you've all done that in speedy time. So Rose, if you wouldn't mind just sharing the results. Okay, so that's encouraging that people want to take this forward. And thank you so much for listening today. I want to just thank everyone for your time today. Please do get in touch. Those of you who are interested in actively being involved, please reach out to us. Our email addresses will be on the materials that we send through to you post this event. We'll be sending a short follow-up, including the materials that we've used today, but also some reflections based on the next steps over the next few days. Please do continue this conversation on the Textile Exchange Hub. This is exactly the right place to continue to learn from one another, to reflect on the challenges that we're facing, but also acknowledge the urgency and the scale of the challenge we can tackle together. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our presenters, and thank you, everyone, for listening in today. All the best, and please do stay safe. Over to you, Rose.
Thank you to our speakers, and thank you for participating in today's webinar. As a friendly reminder, all unanswered questions will be answered via email, and an email will be sent to all registered participants with a link to today's presentation. That concludes our webinar. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.